Do you think democracy is based on Project 2025? Do you think he means what he says when he says he's going to do away with the civil service, eliminate the Department of Education, make sure, we've never been here before. And that's the other reason why you say hand off to another generation. I've got to finish this job. Because there's so much at stake.
President Biden mentioning Project 2025 at last night's news conference. His campaign increasingly has tried to connect Donald Trump with Project 2025. It's a 900-plus page policy roadmap from the conservative think tank, the Heritage Foundation. The proposal packed with far-right agenda items, including abolishing the Department of Education, severe cuts to Medicaid. It says Health and Human Services no longer should consider abortion as a form of health care. It expands deportation powers for the president, and also would expand presidential powers elsewhere significantly. For example, independent agencies like the Department of Justice would answer almost entirely to the president. Donald Trump has tried to distance himself from Project 2025, posting online last week he knows nothing about it or who is behind it. You'll see in a moment why that's not true. He doubled down in a post yesterday claiming he had nothing to do with Project 2025. But many of Trump's key allies have been directly involved. In fact, Project 2025 is staffed by more than 200 former officials of the Trump administration. The former president even spoke about the group's plans at a dinner sponsored by the Heritage Foundation in April of 2022.
Because our country is going to hell. The critical job of institutions such as Heritage is to lay the groundwork, and Heritage does such an incredible job at that. This is a great group, and they're going to lay the groundwork and detail plans for exactly what our movement will do and what your movement will do when the American people give us a colossal mandate to save America. And that's coming. That's coming.
Former President Trump speaking to the Heritage Foundation. That was in April of 2022, just over 2 years ago. Let's bring in NBC News correspondent Vaughn Hilliard. He's been reporting on Donald Trump's ties to Project 2025. So, Vaughn, flesh out a little bit for people who've heard the name Project 2025. They've seen some of the headlines about it. If you can, get into some of the details and explain to people what exactly is in this document. It's a big one. It's almost 1,000 pages long. What it says, and really how close Donald Trump is tied to it.
Right, Willie. I think, number one, this is not just Heritage Foundation. This is a longtime conservative group that, claims that, hey, we did this back with Ronald Reagan back in 1980. We built a similar sort of conservative document, handed over to the Reagan administration to go implement on day one. And that's exactly what they intended to do with this 900-page document. Essentially, it's a playbook of how to operate the departments and the agencies. But there's 100 other allied groups that are involved in this project, including the likes of Turning Point USA and Charlie Kirk, the Claremont Institute, and John Eastman. There are some major figures here that are involved. Russ Vought is the platform director for the Republican National Committee that is putting together the GOP's official platform for Milwaukee next week. He's one of the key authors of this document. But you also have the likes of John McEntee, who is overseeing the database of personnel that they are building in order, during the transition, to pull from in order to staff the thousands of jobs that will need to be filled by political appointees. Who is John McEntee? He was a close personal aide to Donald Trump in the White House and then became the director of personnel. And so in this database, they are currently having conservatives go and fill out essentially an application answering questions about their positions. And then that database is going to be able to be used to staff the Trump White House in 2025. And what is unique about this is in 2 weeks before Donald Trump left office, he implemented what was called Schedule F, which transferred thousands of civil servant jobs and made them political appointment positions here. Joe Biden on day one of his administration rescinded that. Donald Trump and the Heritage Foundation Project 2025 have committed to re-implementing that. And this could be upwards of 50,000 jobs or more, civil servants who could be fired and replaced by loyal Donald Trump supporters. So this is vast. It has been in the works for years, ever since 2022 when Donald Trump made those comments, and now it is ready to be implemented by this next administration.
I'm going to do things a little bit differently tonight because what I want to do is record our session and share it with a couple of, well, actually about 20 other people to see their responses on the same issue. I think it's important as we look at this not to and I find this hard to do, not to be too prejudicial or prejudge what is said. So what I'd like to do is have everybody's initial response to the Project 2025 proposal uh, from the Heritage Foundation, and just a very brief statement of what you think about it, and then go around again and look for any particulars that you may have some pros or cons about. I can preface my comments by saying I find some things in this report, or in this proposition, I guess you would call it, this proposal, that I agree with. So I'm not totally against it, but I also find some very troubling things. So I'd like to begin to articulate that. Most importantly, I think this is grounds for a good discussion, moving away from the ad hominem attacks against Trump and Biden, moving to talking about policies, talking about the economy, about immigration, about social issues, and national defense, and all the other issues that they address. So I welcome the discussion. I had a nice meeting with a Republican friend of mine yesterday, and we were talking about this, and it is possible to engage in a polite conversation, even though the feelings may be strong about the issues. So, at any rate, I don't know whether Dave's joining us, so why don't we just get started? First of all, welcome to everyone. It's been a while. I hope you have had a chance to take a look at the document. Larry, thank you for making that document available. You're starting to hear a whole lot more about Project 2025 in the news. I think, I don't know how many people have read it. I seriously doubt that Donald Trump has read it, since it's more than 280 characters. I don't know if it fits on his phone, but I doubt that he's read it. And from what I hear, he doesn't seem to be very acutely aware of it. But I think it is going to get more attention as time goes on. So why don't, Larry, let me start with you, since you kind of initiated this. Your overall impression of the document and basically the thrust of Project 2025.
Well, if you've read the foreword and woven throughout the document, what little I've read throughout the actual document itself is a theme of how this country is in basically a dystopian hellscape, to where things are so bad, and most of that centers around values, centers around abortion to some degree, it centers around transgender issues, centers around the drug issues in the company and so forth. And so, they paint they try to gain a sense of urgency, I think, over some things that are social issues. And then they sort of weave into sort of the policy issues. And a lot of those are difficult to understand unless you really try to just grasp them and weave them down into it. For instance, they want to make overtime with people who are overtime eligible now. They want to make employers able to classify them as if state employees would recognize as comp time. So you work some time here, it's work 10 hours over this week, you can take 10 hours over some other time, in which they would actually eliminate the overtime pay that the company would have to pay them. So they make it sound like a benefit, but it really, I think, would be very unpopular for those who meet their monthly expenses on overtime. So that's a key too. They also talk about how they very much believe that the left is almost silencing the free speech of so many organizations. You can't do lots of things in the country and charities and within corporations and even in state governments, because the left is controlling the messages that are being required to indoctrinate the people. At the same time, they are trying to propose, in other cases, putting religion back in school, teaching religion in state schools, Ten Commandments, and all these kind of things, and actually restricting rights to people who have transgender children and such. All these things that we're so familiar with. That's all kind of woven into the whole picture here. You know, there
Okay,
are
so
things.
if I can interrupt you for a minute, can you kind of summarize what your initial response to this is? We'll dig into the details, and I appreciate that. But what's your assessment overall?
My assessment overall is that the document does have some good proposals in it. Many that are questionable. Some questionable because I just don't understand them, and some that I think are very onerous. And that, for instance, the administrative state issues and those kinds of things. I think that there are some real hidden aspects of this, or seemingly hidden aspects of this, that would be far-reaching and very damaging to the society.
Okay. David Wunderlin, give us your first take on this. First of all, have you had a chance to read I'm sure maybe not the entire document, but the introduction, the forward that was written by Kevin Roberts?
I did read the 16-page introduction there.
Yeah.
And the four tenets, I guess, I assume then those four are elaborated in the next detailed part of the document.
Mhm.
And I find agreement with those four tenements, the principles. The family is the centerpiece, have self-government, have sovereignty, and live freely. That all sounds great, that's fine. That's what we want to do. It's how we do that, of course, is critical. Having read only that introduction, I noticed that there was not anything about government spending or the national debt or any of that, except that it said something about excessive government. Government being too large. And the other thing it said was, we only have 2 years to do all of this. So anybody who thinks all this can be done in 2 years, come on, that's not very likely. So I don't really have that much to say about it. It reminded me of reading the Democratic platform of 2020. Which wasn't 900 pages, but it was pretty long when I read it, and I'm going to say it was extreme, and I don't mean that in a pejorative way. I mean that it had an extremely large number of issues that it wanted to deal with, and of course, once again, for it, impossible to do all of that. So that's my view.
Okay. Steve, I'd like to hear your assessment, and if you can, I'd like for you particularly to focus on the notion of the deep state and his reference to making more and more government jobs political appointees. So if you can work that into your initial response, I'd appreciate it.
Okay. Well, let me just start by saying I think I agree with David that it seems to me that the document is a wish list for the conservative movement, that there are things they'd like to do, and that quite a few of them are not really that practical. I have hopes that the changes to the administrative state that they're talking about in personnel systems would be among those things that would be hard to do. I can't say that I've kept on top of it as much as I used to when I was actually in the federal government. But I know much of what governed how personnel appointments were made was in statute or regulation, and that would be kind of hard for an incoming administration to change, and definitely not in 2 years. Now, they do have a lot of political appointments, and I'm not as concerned about the number, but about the quality, because I thought one of the disasters of the Trump administration was what poor quality political appointees there were in the Trump administration. And it really makes a difference whether you have somebody there who understands the mission of the agency and the laws they're trying to administer, as opposed to just there to follow whatever the White House says. So I think that's where I am for the overview of administrative state.
Okay. Dave Vislisel, how are you, first of all? And what I appreciate the poster that you sent out a little earlier. What's your take on this?
Came from a neighbor, and it was, it's a half jokey, but I think in summary, it's a quick picture of what Oliver had to say. I did happen to listen to that, at least most of it. It was an excellent choice to kind of expose what is going on and so on. I did not get a chance to dip into any of the other portions of this, but you know that I've introduced at least twice before information I've gotten from my subscription to and my membership in the Americans United for the Separation of Church and State. That is, in their meetings, they have made clear what this Christian nationalist movement is trying to do in its various forms and its various groups. And so the dangers of it, especially in its broadness and attacking everything that is of, well, it offends me personally because most of those items, I do not want. I don't believe in them. I think it's everything from horrible to criminal, and if such were to pass. What I wonder is, though, how, and in a way this is reflecting what Steve said and what David Wunderlin said, is how big a group is this? Do we have any real sense of the deep commitment the Christian nationalists and people of that ilk to this movement? Does it amount to 25% of our American population? Is it more like 30 or 35%? If it's that, and what I've been hearing about is more and more questioning or backing off among independents and common sense Republicans, might I say, in regard to what Trump has said and what is going on in this movement. I think it's an open question of what might happen this time around, but it's dangerous. I'm hoping it's limited to a relatively small group. I've talked to 3 pastors of Christian churches when I do Bible study with, and 2 I'm friendly with. I go to their services occasionally. I talk with them. None of the 3 say they know anything about this, nor have they explored it. And they'd be very reluctant to think that something would be forced on the American people. That's not their kind of Midland Christian church congregational thinking and needs. Beyond that, even if Trump is elected, even if Trump is not elected, this thing won't go away. This is a long-term thing that we'll have to be looking at and having to deal with. And then who knows where it's going to go.
Yeah.
I rest.
Well, I think that the Project 2025 goes beyond the notion of Christian nationalism. I think the folks who are supporting Christian nationalists, the movement, are sympathetic to what Project 2025 has in mind. But
This
I
is deeper
think-
than that, Michael. Yes, and I understand that and know that.
right.
Yeah, it's
But
deep
I think-
government and government officials and
Right.
standbys who have power and influence
Right.
there. Yeah.
This is, I think it's important to understand what the Heritage Foundation is, and if you haven't read it, I'd recommend looking up a little bit of information about the Heritage Foundation. This is nothing new. This same foundation wrote many of the policy statements for Ronald Reagan. They were involved in if you recall, the Contract for America, or what some called the Contract on America. Newt Gingrich pushed back in the 90s. So this is not a new thing that's coming on the horizon. What the response of the reason this exists is when Trump won the election in 2016, he was not ready to be president. In fact, there was a lot of speculation that he never even thought he had a chance to become president.
I think that's pretty true.
Many people thought that he was doing this to basically as a form of publicity, and that he was going to turn it into a media empire, and basically usurp the influence that Fox News and other outlets have, and that was what he was focused on. So he found himself in the White House, and they had no plans. And so he fumbled around. One of the reasons why there was such a great turnover in staff is they didn't know how to run the government. They had no idea what the offices were, most of them. So they pulled names out of the hat, and he would pull in somebody like a Rick Perry and make him, put him in charge of the Department of Energy. And when he did, Rick Perry became secretary, and then was told that he was responsible for nuclear energy, and he had no idea. So they were stretching to find what to do in government, and it was very awkward and very disjointed. So what the Heritage Foundation is doing is trying to be better organized and ready to hit the ground running when Trump is elected, and have things lined up. Now, I don't think Trump understands what they're doing. I mean, I don't like to keep belittling the man, but he deserves it. He doesn't understand what's going on, but what he wants is people who are going to be loyal to him. So as long as they are, as long as they bow and scrape to Trump, he doesn't care about things like the EPA or the National Weather Service or any of the other governmental organizations that are critical. He just wants somebody who's going to be loyal to him. So what the Heritage Foundation is doing is saying, oh, you need a plan? Here's a plan. Oh, we got this covered. We got this covered. Here's a guy for this. And to take the work away from Trump. And so right now, I heard him the other day saying, I don't know anything about 2025, never heard of it, and don't know anything about it. Well, he's probably heard of it. I don't think he fully understands it. But if somebody's going to do all the work for him and he can take credit for it, there it is.
There you go.
So
I jump in. I think that the Heritage Foundation has morphed and changed over the years, and that this Project 2025 is not your typical Heritage Foundation stamp on it. They brought in a lot of former Trump appointees. They're cabinet secretaries, Peter Navarro, Stephen Miller, a lot of people who were in the Trump administration from 2016 to 2020, and their views, I'm sure, are shaped by what they hear from MAGA constituency, but also from in their own echo chamber of what they think is important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's interesting that Kevin Roberts, who's the president of the Heritage Foundation, is from Louisiana, as is Mike Johnson. And I don't think it's a coincidence that when Roberts took over as president, we had Johnson taking over as Speaker of the House. I think I hate to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but there is a work behind the scenes to put certain people in critical positions. as they've done on the Supreme Court and have done in a lot of congressional seats. So they're working very hard, and I have to admire the fact that they're so diligent in pursuing their goal, and they have a long view of things, which I think the left is missing. David, to your point, I've seen or David Wunderlin, to your point, I've seen the Democratic Party fall into the same sort of, I don't know, it's not a trap exactly, but it's this illusion that you can take a lot of disjointed things and write them all up and put them in it and call it a platform. And I think that's what I see in the document, is everybody's pet peeve being addressed. So, but I guess the question is, are there some things in what you've seen so far that you can find agreement with? Larry, I want to go back to you again. I think you mentioned that the last time, that you saw some things that the document's not entirely bad. There are some things that that stand out for me. How about you?
Right. Actually, I go back to the last page of the forward, is that the next president should crack down on crony capitalist corruption that enables America's largest corporations to profit through political influence rather than competitive enterprise and customer satisfaction. That sounds very un-Republican to me. So, and I'm surprised that they would put that in there. And if they had gone a little further and says that they need to bring back the McCain-Feingold laws and get that back on the books, then I think that they'd have that captured. And I read the section on national defense, and pieces of it anyway. And they talked about how they think that the country needs to, the strategy needs to be to place more emphasis on Africa. From the standpoint of the political, military, financial type of development that right now Russia and China are dominating, and even in Central and South America, those foreign powers are gaining a foothold. So I certainly agree with doing something around that.
I'm having someone joining us here. Come sit down. Okay, we'll get ready in a moment here. Steve Eilers is joining us here. He's had trouble with his computer at home, so here he is, showing up in person.
Howdy.
Kind of
Part of it.
part of
Steve.
We can get you all on the same screen.
Here looking.
Yeah.
How y'all doing?
Hey, Steve.
Good.
Nice to see you, Steve.
Nice to see everybody. Y'all look so colorful. Awful white.
We've been discussing the Project 2025, and we kind of took an introduction, an overview of what we'd read, at least in the introduction, and now we're digging a little deeper into some of the things. And what I've asked Larry is about the positive aspects of it. You're mentioning Africa, Larry, and I agree. That's one of the things that I saw that I think America has been ignoring to our peril, the fact that the Chinese are building large ports throughout Africa and supporting the economy in Africa, while we seem to be just trying to make sure none of them immigrate here. But
well, they have an advantage on us from a moral standpoint, because they didn't just go in and buy off the local autocratic officials and get what they really need in terms of access. And we have laws against doing those kinds of things, and we tend to go in and want to bring all the people of that country on board and shape things to the benefit of all the common populations. And it's tough when they can go in and just start pushing money across the table of a local autocrat, and next thing you know, they have a port under construction.
Yeah. David Wunderlin, what any of the positive aspects of this that I think you had highlighted a couple before, but if there are things that you see in this that you favor, what are they?
Yeah, thank you. Well, correct me if I'm wrong. I understand that 2025, Project 2025 is not part of the Republican platform.
David, can you turn the volume up on yours a little bit? It's hard to hear.
Hard to hear me?
Yeah.
Is he talking into a coconut?
Okay.
Yeah, that's better.
David, I can comment on that. My understanding is that the people who wrote the platform were by and large the core group that were responsible for Project 2025. I'm sure there are differences. The 2025 doesn't mention it doesn't mention outlawing abortion totally, but it does place a lot of restrictions on it. And the platform, as I understand it, says that they're in favor of a 15-week abortion ban. So there's some variations there, but I think that there's a lot of similarities there. I haven't read it.
I assume there's parallels, but it hadn't been adopted. Is that correct?
It's correct. The convention will adopt it.
The convention will adopt it?
Well, that's when it'll be adopted one way or the other, either they adopt it or not.
I see. Okay.
It's a convention.
Yeah, well, your question, Michael, the emphasis on the family, I think, is correct. I'm very much in favor of that. There are a lot of controversial issues about family, about children and how you support them and how you enable them, and whether you give them freedom to explore things or not. And I want to also mention crony capitalism is not a sectarian or I mean that's universal.
Right.
Everybody goes through that. Not having read it, I can't comment on very much of it, but I understand that it's in favor of smaller government, and I want to use the example of the education department. I don't know what the education department does, but I know that states have education department and school districts have school boards, and it just seems like that. There's some duplication there. I'm sure there's things that the National Education Department does and can do, research or other things that are valuable. And then there are a lot of things that the government does that are useful, I will say, but when you can't, I go to my own company, there would have been things I could have done that were useful, but we couldn't afford it, so we didn't do it. And we did without, and we, I don't know, slid by, overcame, whatever you want to say. So those are my comments.
Okay.
Too bad you couldn't print money like the federal government does.
Well, welcome, Stan. Good to see you.
Hi.
But
Hey,
let me catch you up.
Sorry.
You get a T for tardy today, but we've been discussing Project 2025, and we had everyone's general impression. So I'm going to ask Steve Eilers here first. I think you remember Steve Eilers, don't you?
Hi, Steve.
How you doing?
What we'd ask for is basically just an initial response. If you read the introduction to this, I'm interested in knowing what your gut reaction is to it offhand. So tell us how you respond to what you've read so far.
I actually haven't. I don't know enough about it to speak well of it. I really don't. I know it's like 900 pages,
right?
And I've tried to read some synopsis, try to read the bullet points. I didn't see anything that excited me a whole lot. But again, I don't know enough about it to make any logical or sensible statement.
Okay.
How about you, Stan?
I tried to that link that I think Larry, did you include that link, or somebody included a link to the document and recommended we read the introduction, and I couldn't. That link was not live on my email that I got. But anyway, I did watch the Oliver rant about the whole thing, and it seems like his big concern, a lot of people's concern, is about giving more power to the presidency and therefore negatively affecting the balance of power that the founders put into the Constitution to try to keep any one group or individual having too much power or unrestrained power. And I think it's doubly concerning if Trump is president, because he is a person who, by all indications, would love to be the boss of everything and say, "You're fired if I don't like you."
Mhm.
And I know there's a lot of criticism of, or a lot of fear that he's going to replace competency with loyalty. Not that those two are necessarily mutually exclusive, but I don't know. Most of my input is from the liberal press, but it's a little concerning. But there's those of you that know more, like Steve, who was what knows has been a participant in the federal bureaucracy. There may be some guardrails that would prevent this plan from being implemented to the full, which I fear could lead to a autocratic presidency. So that's my concern.
Yeah. Steve, let me go back to that a question I was asking of the positive things in there, and I don't want to limit your response just to the hiring practices of the federal government, but I do appreciate your expertise in that. And is there anything in what you've read about the reaction to what they're referring to as the deep state? Is there anything that you agree with that do you see why they're complaining, in other words, and do you understand their objections?
Well, sure, but I think it's something that we've all known for years, in that that there is something of a slow turning of the cogwheels of bureaucracy. Sometimes there is perhaps too much of a bloat in some areas, and there are a lot of, when you talk about the balance of power, there are a lot of congressional supporters for different segments of what goes on in the executive branch, because they've created the laws that create, that create the programs that are run by the executive branch. So there's just a lot of give and take there, and it takes good actors in all the parts that are working together to make the programs that are funded and remain in place, appropriate, that they get reviewed, that they get evaluated, that they're making sense, that they're worth the money, and that they aren't just going on in perpetuity just because they got started.
Mm-hmm.
So it takes a lot of people looking at a lot of little small components. The agency that I worked in had 80 different programs, and they all had, their own source of funding, the Public Health Service Act, or, and then there would be hearings about those programs, and the members of Congress who were in place at that time might not be the ones who originally authorized the program, but they have an interest in it because they have constituents that tell them we need this program. So let me take example of community health centers. When I was there, it was being expanded in the George W. Bush administration, increasing the number of community health centers. Community health center has a sliding fee scale. If you have no insurance and can't afford much, you'll still get medical treatment, and you'll pay what you can. They'll try to help you get on Medicaid if you need that, but they're in underserved areas of the country, poor urban areas, rural areas, and places where people need primary care and have a hard time getting it. Well, there were about 900 community health centers, and they have a organization, National Association of Community Health Centers, that is a lobbying group for them. And the lobbyists definitely influence the members of Congress who sit on the committees who approve the funding for the community health center. And over time, it got more and more funding. And it's important for people who don't have any other way to get primary health care. The people who are running it are running nonprofit organizations. And so they're trying to get grant money to help cover the costs that they bear by providing free or low cost services. They get reimbursed by Medicare, they get reimbursed by private health insurance, but they take on all these patients that don't have either private health insurance or Medicare or Medicaid. And so they need grant money to make that happen. So it all kind of goes around. The people giving the services have an organization that talks to the congressman put money in it, and the administrative branch takes that money and distributes it out to the nonprofit organizations through a grant making process. I mean, they have to meet certain standards and apply for grants and so on. That's just one little area. Actually, it wasn't that little. I think it ends up being now it's something like a $2 billion program. But that's one example, and there's examples all across the country. You want to evaluate that. How well does it work? Is the money that's being put in well spent? Well, we have a Office of Inspector General. They go out and look at what's happening in those programs, and they go out and make an assessment and say, is the money being spent properly or not? You have, in addition to the grants that go out, you have contracts. So you have a whole contracting office operation where it has to be a competitive process for people to get contract money. So there's a lot of little mechanisms, and it's just more complicated than most people understand. And it could be done better. It could always be done better. We had a lot of effort on preventing fraud, waste, and abuse. And
Steve, what, if I may interrupt, what you just described reminds me of the 1990 to 2000 state program, the Department for Adult Education Literacy Workforce Development Cabinet. It was all based on contract, federal and state money. You apply for a grant. You apply for the right to create and administer a program that reaches adults in training in each county, basically. Although in some cases, a university or a community college would they would get agreement that we will serve through our auspices, through our direction, we will serve 3 or 4 counties. You know, all that process that you described was exactly what the state was doing with almost no variation. I find that I find that interesting.
No. Well, one section of this that I think relates to it, there's one paragraph, it's on page 7 of the introduction. Congress passes intentionally vague laws that delegate decision-making over a given issue to a federal agency. That agency's bureaucrats, not just unelected, but seemingly unfireable, then leap at the chance to fill the vacuum created by Congress's preening cowardice. The federal government is growing larger and less constitutionally accountable, even to the president, every year. And before that, they say, given the choice between, this refers to Congress, given the choice between being powerful but vulnerable or irrelevant but famous, most members of Congress have chosen the latter. What I agree with.
A lot of spin there, Michael. That's a lot of spin.
I understand that, but what I agree with is that the system is not efficient, both the Congress and as it relates to agencies, because what we have in our Constitution was designed for an 18th century rural economy. It was not designed for an international, highly technical organization. So we want to do something. So we, as Dave was saying, we need something done. So let's make this thing, put an agency there and put them in charge of it. Well, you shouldn't do that unless you're planning to build in the oversight and review regularly and all of the things that need to be done. But Congress doesn't do that. What they do is they complain about it when it doesn't work the way they want, but they don't want to delegate the power to people. And it doesn't, that's to be quoted.
I think that the comment, there was spin in the way they described it, but it's true that the laws are passed with general wording, and they know that it's going to take a regulation process to make it work. I mean, they mean the Congress. So when they pass it, I don't think we want them to act like public health experts or nuclear scientists or aviation experts, right? We want them to recognize that there's an issue, create, or just continue to fund existing programs. Let's take the Federal Aviation Administration, right? Do we need that? Yes, we need that. Okay, how they work, how well they work should be subject to oversight. Congress does have a general accounting office that can take a look at things for them if they want to. And members of Congress do ask the general accounting office to go out and look at a particular program if they think there's some problem there. Let me go back just on the regulation. The government experts, the people who are hired as scientists, physicians, lawyers, whatever the professional qualifications they have when they're hired, come with that expertise. But they aren't just able to put a regulation in place willy-nilly, because there's a whole set of statutory guidelines on how you can do it. You want to do a regulation, you have to put out draft proposals and let the public comment on it. In something called the Federal Register, you guys ever heard of the Federal Register? It's where things get published. Going to be a grant opportunity. You want to apply for a grant, you publish, here's where you can get information about how to apply for the grant and what the deadlines are. But also they put in the Federal Register draft regulations, and the public can comment. Well, most members of the public don't have much time to look at regulations and comment, but their interest groups do. And there are plenty of interest groups that, on both sides or many sides of any issue who will comment. You have to address all those comments if you're going to be writing the regulation. And your lawyers have to look at whatever you put in the regulation. Obviously, your lawyers. Actually, they're not my lawyers. They don't work for us. They're part of our department, but they have a totally different chain of command. So I can't make those lawyers, I can't put any pressure on them to decide something one way or the other. This is one of the guardrails. They tell us whether it's legal or not, and we have to follow, their advice. They will say, you could do that if you want to, but you're going to be subject to some challenges that might look like this. So sometimes they give you leeway and you can take a risk or not. But if you try to do something that's not legal in their view, you can't do it. Mm-hmm. So you're trying to make a regulation that's legal, that meets the terms of the legislation that's sponsored the program, and it responds to all these public comments that come in. So it's a whole process. It's not an easy thing. I worked on little pieces of a number of regulations, and it's pretty complicated to get that out. It's not just done willy-nilly.
Stan, let me go back to the original question. I didn't give you a chance to respond to that. We were looking for positive aspects of the 2025 proposal. Did you see anything? Have you seen anything in the document or in discussion related to it that you agree with, that you could endorse?
I haven't read any of the document, and I've only gotten my information from the media and from people who have a particular position. So I haven't been able to look at anything from a objective perspective. So I really don't think I can comment on what might be good. I mean, certainly if there is waste, if there is abuse, you know, that is something that would aim for that. But I don't know. Like I said, most of my information has come from secondary sources, so I really don't feel like I can qualify on what would be good about it.
Dave, Vislisel, how about you? Anything on the positive side that you
Well,
see?
I didn't see any single thing, although David Wunderlin mentioned support of the family. And of course, that's a value that I don't think that can be addressed by any particular piece of legislation or fiat from any group. That's something that is societally deeply complex, and support of a family, support of kids. You know, if you're going to give birth to them, how do you protect them? How do you raise them? How do you make them, how do you keep them from going crazy? Because nearly as I can tell, there's a whole lot of crazy kids out there these days. I'd have to have a list in front of me in order to say, oh, that might show some promise if it's thus and thus, or it looks good to me. But no, like Stan just says, I haven't really examined the details enough or even the headings enough to say, well, this one might show promise.
Well, as I said, I see this document as something that I could write a similar document citing some of the same problems, but recommending a different slant on that problem.
Yes,
On the issue of family, for instance. Yeah, of course I support, strong families and anything we can do to keep families together, but that also means immigrant families coming across the border. Keep families together is important there. Keeping families together by not incarcerating so many people as we do today. So the problem that they cite is a valid issue. Their solution, their strategy, their bent on it, I don't agree with. As part of their issue on family is they're resisting the idea of counseling transgender children. Well, I haven't had to face that in my life. I know other people who have. I have a neighbor who has, and it's difficult if they don't have some sort of support system. So, yeah, I don't want to push transgender, push that as a cause, but I want to respond to it. And I think people on the right generally share most of our values. I don't think there's a big separation. I think it's the strategy for achieving it. It's much like saying we're having an international struggle. Should we attack or should we negotiate? There's different ways of approaching a problem. So as I go through the document, I'm seeing a lot of things that I agree with, but there's an underlying sense that things are not organized very well. The fact that they point to this huge federal bureaucracy, and I agree, it's huge. Maybe we need to reconsider how we organize those things. From my point of view, I think we should elect people to our Congress who are specialists in each of those fields. In other words, Kentucky should elect someone who is a climate specialist, and they become the head of the climate committee. That we pick people who are accomplished in a given area and let them contribute. That's what I would do. But Steve says I'm dreaming. I probably am. I'm overly optimistic about this. But what we have now is people run for Congress and they're concerned about getting reelected. They never become expert on anything. So where does that expertise lie? Well, their answer seems to be, well, simplify it and just put the president in charge of it and he'll make all the right decisions.
Yeah.
Michael, hold on. We elect doctors to Congress. We elect former military generals or officers to Congress.
Right.
We do elect people with.
I'm not saying we don't. I'm saying we don't designate them. I mean, they should be running as I think the cabinet positions should be elected positions. That we should elect the person in charge of the Department of Transportation, and we should elect them on the basis of their competence. So what they're saying in this document is, this is all too complicated. Let's just give all the power to the president and let him decide. And that is far too Machiavellian for me. I don't want any president to decide everything. I want a distribution of power. I want a separation.
Yeah.
But the issue is Congress won't take over the operations of the weather service. So who's going to do it?
They want to eliminate it because they see it as a what I've heard is they want to eliminate NOAA. They want to eliminate the atmospheric, whatever you call it, organization that, you know, keeps track of all these things because they're climate alarmist. And they want to eliminate that all that expertise that looks at, examines everything we need to know about the climate, as well as, you know, our day-to-day weather forecasts, et cetera. They want to get rid of that because they're climate alarmists. Now that to me is disturbing. That's very political. That doesn't seem to be very practical.
I think they want to get rid of a lot of stuff, don't they?
Well, that's just one example that comes to mind. But yeah, they want to. I mean, yeah, the Department of Ed. Yeah, what does it do? Can it be cut back? What else do they want to get rid of?
Just want to make sure the point.
I think they want. Did they want to have the Justice Department come under the purview of the president?
Yeah,
yeah.
That's pretty frightening.
That's kind of scary too. You know,
already does. Its Attorney General is appointed by the president.
Yeah, but isn't there a degree of independence on the part of the Attorney General? The president doesn't tell the Attorney General what crimes to investigate and what to prosecute, et cetera.
He will.
That's traditionally been the case.
They would like a Department of Justice that where the president can say, "Go after these people. I don't like them."
There's some evidence that
I was thinking that it'd be really interesting for progressives to set up a parallel. You could almost take it point by point in response. So what would progressives do as a parallel to what these conservative plotters might do?
You're reading my mind.
Maybe some answers would emerge out of that, and maybe they wouldn't.
Well, you're reading my mind because as we come
here's
to
the problem.
Yeah.
Here's the problem. Here's how we reactionaries would solve it. How would a progressive solve it?
Mm-hmm. Well, as I said, you're reading my mind because that's what I would like to suggest that we do. And for our next time around, what I'd like for everybody to do is pick a section of this. It's a long document, so don't expect anybody to read 1,000 pages. But if you pick an area, a subject, or section of this that's of interest to you, do just what Dave was suggesting. Can you put together, and I don't expect it, it's not a homework assignment, but just think about it. And what plan would you come up with to address the issue that they're bringing up? This is what I'm striving for in every conversation I have is, what is the issue? Don't tell me what your conclusion is. Tell me what the problem is, and let's consider the problem from a lot of different perspectives and come up with a joint solution. That's what democracy should be. And so if you can look at the document, find a section that that piques your interest, and read it a couple of times, and maybe respond to it. It doesn't have to be extremely well researched, but just as I said, with dealing with children, that you shouldn't overreach and interfere with family operations, but neither should you allow abuse in a family. So where do you draw the line? How does this become a viable process? That's what I would really like to see come out of this, a discussion of the issues, because we're talking around it now. We're just saying, are you for Trump or are you for Biden? Well, screw both of them. This is about America. It's about our country, what we're going to do together. And this group has put together a set of ideas that will be implemented if Trump is elected. And I think before that happens, we need to have a response to these. Even if we concede the election, we need to respond to these issues because the fight goes on. If Trump is elected, we don't we don't crawl up in a corner and get in a fetal position and cry.
Yeah.
Well, I have my crib here. I'm ready. If he
Uh,
he's elected, I'm just going to get in there and suck my thumb until
Mike,
Larry, you had some. Larry, you had something.
from a practical standpoint, I think rather than trying to take a whole chapter, because these chapters get very deep, just pull out a piece. Because the chapters all have sub-chapters and sections to them and that go through and create detail of what they're trying to do. Just pick out a segment there that piques your interest and deal with that, because that's probably a lot more manageable.
Well, I hope that's something that we could.
it sounds like an interesting endeavor.
Well,
Yeah,
as I said,
I'll-
I'd like to share this discussion that I am recording this, and I'd like to share this discussion with some other friends who would do the same thing. I would really like to engage in a large conversation about this. I hope that the Democrats come up with something on their own. Not that I'll agree with it totally,
Yeah.
but we need to talk about issues and not about, whose golf game is best and, all the crap that we hear in the so-called debate. I want to have some substantive discussion of issues. So let's think about that for next time. And
I wonder if we should let you know what we would
yeah, absolutely.
like, so that we won't be duplicating.
Yeah,
things.
just if you have one, just copy everyone on it. And if you wanted to work together on a topic,
Yeah,
if it's
why
a
don't we
big
all
topic,
talk
that's
Yeah. Uh,
Pick the same
I
stuff.
might have the link that was in one of the emails wasn't live. So if I just Google Project 25, I can find a link to the
may
document.
not. I'll send you that link again if it wasn't a live link.
Yeah.
Sorry if it wasn't. I'll send it to you right now after.
All right.
Okay. Well, I think this is a good start. I hope this is of interest to you. I'd rather have this discussion. This is something I can share with Republican friends of mine. This is something I can talk about with people who disagree with me.
Yeah.
Because it's trying to find the middle ground, I suppose. But when somebody makes a bold statement about federal government employees, Steve, I'd like to hear your response to that. And I'd like them to hear that response. I don't want them to just hear what Kevin Roberts says about it. I want to hear what Steve Smith has to say about that, because you have more experience in that than he has. You know more about it than he does. So I want to begin to share that. So, well, this is very good tonight. It's 8:00. We try to stop on time. So I appreciate it, everybody. Any parting words from anyone?
Hey, what's that beach you're on there? Looks nice.
I'm sorry.
Dave Wunderlin, what's that beach you're on?
On that TV.
You may.
Where is David? Where are you, David?
He's got an artificial background.
That's great.
Is that what he's doing?
In my soul, I'm at TV.
In